Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Peter Davis, managing partner of Interplay. I'm on a mission to help entrepreneurs advance society, and this podcast is definitively part of that effort. Today, we've got Shaun Walker, CEO of Spoke, on the show. Spoke does business process outsourcing, and that is partnering with a firm like a BPO like Spoke to get labor from offshore locations, typically, to help out with core ongoing operations within a company. I think this is one of the most valuable toolkits that entrepreneurs have available to them that most do not know about or know how to use properly. Spoke is a platform company, so Shaun gave us a lot of time. This was a great opportunity to kind of get into the weeds and think about how to really leverage these platforms. The key about outsourcing is you can upskill talent and you can cut costs. It's really a unique opportunity. So it's just something I feel like every founder should really be intentional about choosing not to use or to use. And I think for most folks, it just doesn't get on their radar early enough, and then it's too late. So I hope you enjoy and hope you learn something. All right, Shaun, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to see you.
This is a really cool topic because I think outsourcing is one of the under-leveraged capabilities in startup land. And it's the main thing now, but it's still not being fully utilized. So I'd love to start just before we kind of get into kind of strategy around outsourcing, just by let's level set on Spoke and what you're building.
Sure. Yeah, thank you again for having me. Love the opportunity to talk about Spoke, what we're building, and how we help startups scale and grow. We provide remote, offshore, and nearshore talent solutions. And one of the big questions we've been addressing and thinking about is how are we different? BPO, staff augmentation, outsourcing, sort of all mean the same thing, but also sort of don't. And the approach that we have and where we're going with it is we really specialize in building highly embedded, dedicated teams that ultimately, if we're doing it right, feel like extensions of our client businesses and our client teams. The line between them and us, so to speak, that line becomes extremely blurry. So it's not really just outsourced help. And it's something I hear from clients all the time who maybe in a previous company, previous job, previous role, they worked with a quote unquote like traditional BPO company where it was extremely input-output driven. Almost nameless, right? They wouldn't even necessarily know the name of the employees working for them. It was just sort of, I need this job done. I don't care who does it. If performance suffers, get rid of them, find somebody new. They start working with Spoke, these clients, and at first it's a little bit like, well, wait a second, this is new, this is different. But there's usually this like aha moment where they're like, okay, I get it now. And the difference is, again, it's that highly embedded, highly dedicated team that feels like an extension. And if we're doing it right, our team members at Spoke feel just as motivated to help clients solve their business goals as the clients do themselves. And so in a space that I think tends to commoditize talent and thinks of people as like robots in a way, I like to think that we're approaching it in a much more human, people first way.
So, but BPO, business process outsourcing, is this broad bucket of outsourcing all types of labor functions. Okay. Yeah. The model you're doing has people who only work with one company at a time, right? So if a client
Correct.
has 5 people at Spoke on their team, those people wake up, they think they're basically functioning as part of that team, right?
Correct.
So
yeah.
Why wouldn't a firm just go out and hire people directly in an offshore location? Why would they use a BPO, an actual firm?
Yeah, and I'll be the first person, and I'm usually the first person to say it, when I'm talking to a prospective client or somebody at a trade show or an event or something, there are use cases where we are not the right fit. And I am happy to refer people to an Upwork, or in certain cases, hiring direct as a contractor makes sense, or even working with a different BPO makes sense. Ultimately, there are, of course, the legal, compliance, regulatory, HR, payroll challenges of just operating a globally distributed team. Those are going to be true for every company, whether you're a startup or not. But beyond that stuff, the clients we work for, we work with, and the partnerships ultimately that we hope to develop, those are based on a shared vision and value set that's based on the idea that the right people make all the difference, and together we're creating an environment that attracts, retains, rewards people for contributing to the overall success of the client business. So we take care of all the back office stuff, but that's kind of table stakes, right? That's not that interesting. Where we really shine is when it comes to employee engagement and the culture building stuff. We're in the process right now, for example, of planning and executing a pretty large event for employees in June. So that's an opportunity for us to get everybody together, thank them for their contribution to both Spoke and clients. But it's stuff like that our clients can't do themselves, because if they've only got 2 or 3 employees overseas somewhere, the economics just don't make sense for them to fly over there, do the engagement stuff, spend the one-on-one time. That ultimately makes a difference and an impact. So, again, just there's the compliance legal side of it, but even just beyond that, what I think is more important is when you're building a high-performing environment, a strong culture, that requires in-person time. Nothing beats it. I think it's pretty difficult or impossible really to get around. And I think you see a lot of that. I think just this morning I saw on CNBC that Uber is announcing, 3 days a week back in office, right? And Uber's entire business model is predicated on people doing stuff out of the office, right? So, I think if we look at, trends, I think ultimately this sort of hybrid setup is going to prevail. And so again, I think there's something to be said about in person, and that's where we are really able to support partners and clients.
So I think the thing that really throws people about BPO as its particular niche of outsourcing broadly is people don't know what to use it for. Right? You got outsource dev. You go to dev shops. The function that maps to.
Yeah.
Right? There might be particular marketing agencies. There's all these things that people have woven into the toolkit more rapidly. I feel like only a subset of the more sophisticated managers in the startup phase have figured out the BPO angle. And I don't think it's for lack of interest. I think it's for lack of understanding where it fits.
Mm-hmm.
So how does someone, because the idea, right, you guys have people with a bunch of different skill sets. Mm-hmm. So it's almost information overload.
Yeah.
So what's the best way for an executive to think about, hey, this is when I should be thinking about leveraging an outsourcing service? What are the particular functions? What are the particular moments that should cause that trigger, that light bulb to go off? What pain point should trigger them?
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. Everything you just described, I think, is true for really, companies of every size and every industry. I think that the challenges are compounded in the startup space because you just raised a bunch of money, right? Your Series A, your Series B, you just raised it around. You've got, 18 months before you're probably going to go out and raise again. What do you have to show for it, right, in that period of time? So you've got maybe 12 months to execute. Therefore, you got, 6 months to just get things in place so that you can execute, right? So when you reverse engineer your fundraising timeline, it starts to get really stressful from a managing growth, managing people perspective. So that information overload, that we want to do this, we don't know how, we don't know where to start, I think it only increases in a fast-growing startup space. And where Spoke is also focused is helping companies figure out that how do we go from 1 to 10, 10 to 100 puzzle. Most companies that we work with, that we start working with, we try to make it as easy as possible. it's one, it's two, it's three individuals, three team members, typically where the biggest needs are. And generally speaking, what we're saying is, look, if you are a deep tech company, maybe we shouldn't be supporting you with the deep tech side of your business. If you are a, engineering heavy company, we could support you, but we probably recommend having, your leadership in country. If you're in the finance accounting space, right, like we probably would recommend you having your leadership roles in the US. But it's how do we augment and supplement around, those key positions that are supportive of your product direction, your business roadmap, with some really good folks overseas, and that's where we can really help. But again, it's not saying, hey, let's move 10 or 20 or 30 roles overseas. It's let's start with a couple where the biggest needs are. We support customers across really all functional areas of their businesses. We are, our largest customer, for example, we support them in about 8 functional areas. Everything from accounting, finance to, customer support, of course, engineering. I think I said finance accounting, but market operations. It's an insurance company, so there's brokerage operations and stuff like that as well. But again, with most new partners, new clients, we're starting in one place. Our goal in working with startups is to make it as easy and effortless as possible. A lot of bigger competitors might require that there's a certain number of headcount that you start with, or might ask you to sign a long-term contract. We don't really start with that stuff. The focus is on just making it as approachable and effortless as possible. We can't, in our business, we can't truly do sampling like we could if we were in a product business or a software business, right? Like we can't really give away free trials, but we could do the next best thing, which is we can make it really easy to try. We can make it a really low risk proposition from a cost perspective. So, but yeah, again, and then, over time we grow. So with our largest customer, as I said, we didn't start supporting them across 8 functional areas. It's what happened, over the course of about 2 years. And I will say, I've talked to some CEOs who don't get clear on this strategy early enough, and where they end up is, they're a big business, but all of their leaders, everybody on their leadership team has sort of a preferred outsourcing vendor they work with. And so then what you end up with is you've got multiple outsourcing vendors. You don't really have any economies of scale. Everything I talked about before from an employee engagement culture perspective becomes increasingly, probably exponentially more challenging because you've got that many, vendor partners you have to work with. People aren't talking. People are extremely siloed. That's not a good position to be in. And in fact, so for some of these CEOs, we've been talking about how to potentially fix that for them, but it's a pretty big challenge. So in general, of course I'm biased here, but I think when you're sitting down to develop your outsourcing strategy, don't think about it as just a cost savings. I think if that's the extent of the thinking, I think you're missing a lot of the opportunity. This is really can become a strategic advantage. And I think one of the aspects or one of the components that makes it strategic advantage longer term is when you are working with a partner who can support you across business units. Because again, you're avoiding the issues that you would get in any company that's overly siloed, that's not talking. So yeah, again, the goal is to make it easy to start. And then, from that moment on, it's incumbent on us to show value, to demonstrate the value, and then to have good consultative conversations with you about how to grow responsibly and in a manner that is supportive and consistent with your business strategy.
Now, obviously, offshoring's a lot less expensive than hiring in the U.S.,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's kind of the concept, a little bit of labor cost arbitrage.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that's not the main motivator. I get it. What is? How should someone sit there and think, okay, we're going to do, why do outsourcing at all if it's not a cost advantage? Is it access to less competitive talent pools and so you're getting better people on average? What's the logic for jumping in?
I mean, just to be clear, I mean, the cost savings is absolutely a motivator. But I think where I've seen a conversation go more recently, and the Philippines is a good example. It's actually a very well-informed market. It's competitive. Unemployment's, I don't know, 4-ish%. Um, so the labor arbitrage there is really from like a cost of living perspective. I don't know that it, when looking, in the Philippines itself, for example, I don't know if there's inefficiencies there among individuals in the market. Like I think it's a pretty well-functioning, well-informed labor market there. But relative to the U.S., yeah, it's significant savings. And I think a misconception is in Philippines, for example, that it's perhaps maybe not as educated or not as sophisticated or not as talented. I mean, our office in Manila is right down the street from Oracle and Accenture. Insurance companies have been there for decades. So it's actually a very well educated market. But given that it's a much lower cost of living, it's just still much less expensive to hire there. So that is still, I think, especially for a venture-backed startup that's, again, thinking about what do I have to do in the next 18 months so that I can go out and raise another round. This does, from a CEO executive perspective, right? This does help from a runway extension perspective, right? You can support larger headcount through this as a strategy. And with our largest customer, again, they just recently achieved profitability. We represent a sizable chunk of their workforce. So, I can honestly say that we've been instrumental in helping them hit that milestone. So I certainly don't want to diminish the importance of that because it is important. But I think the other components of it, which are you have talented people that are just as talented as the folks in the US that are in many cases as motivated or perhaps more motivated to perform and to excel than are the folks, and this might be a little controversial. I am thinking about conversations I've had with hiring managers who have expressed difficulty in hiring in the U.S. recently, and people are attributing it right or wrong to COVID. I don't know if that's necessarily the primary causal attribute here, but like people don't seem to want to work as hard is something I hear enough times to maybe, right or wrong, start to believe that. And, the truth is, like, people in Manila are extremely excited and grateful to have the opportunity to work for US-based startups. So I think, what a lot of our clients are finding is they can find, team members who are just as engaged, just as excited to contribute. And, that's something that shows up in our tenure. We've got folks celebrating 6 and 7 year anniversaries, which again, I think is just reflective of the work ethic and the dedication and commitment. So I would not say that this should be the only, strategy from a people perspective that companies pursue. I just think this is a great, it's a great value add when it's really taken into account on a holistic basis.
I think the other thing about this that is particularly compelling for venture scale, rapid growth startups is the growth motion. Like you said, the gun goes off and you've got an 18 to 24 month sprint till your next fundraise. You got to hit some milestones. And maybe you have an internal talent function. Maybe it's fully scaled. Maybe it's robust. Maybe it's not. And the idea that there's a partner that is also going to be driving the talent development, hiring people, turning up that volume or down. So it's sending an email and making a requisition for more talent rather than hiring another recruiter or whatever the machinery is internally to get that going. So I just think it's a little bit of a bionic scaling function for a lot of this operational side.
Bionic scaling, I like that. Just to build on that, Mark, I mean, we help clients with US-based hiring too from the Philippines. We haven't come out with a catchy name for it yet, but something like recruitment process outsourcing. Yeah, I like Bionic. Yeah, but it's true. I mean, a lot of our clients last year, right, 2024, 2023, they were challenging for tech. all of our clients, or most of them anyways, had at least one reduction in force, if not multiple. And usually we're seeing that it's talent acquisition teams, HR teams are getting slashed early and often during those. In one case, one of our VP of people leaders at a client, she had to coordinate the whole reduction in force, and she was also impacted by it. So she had to do all the dirty work, knowing that at the end of it, she was, sailing off a cliff herself. And it's gut wrenching. It's really, so it's gut wrenching on the personal side, but from a business impact side, it's extremely challenging. So, we're also in a position to be able to come in and support clients when they have shed that function, but then they find out, okay, maybe we were too aggressive. We let too many people go. We have to hire some folks back, or we need to spin up recruitment in the US very quickly. We can manage all of that. And so you're absolutely right that, whether it's the Bionic, growth function or whatever we end up calling it, there is a component of that where it's just like, you know what, I have some immediate problems that I need solved, and I don't know what to do, or I don't want to spend the time spinning up a whole team internally, right? Those are all extremely valid.
The other dimension on this that I think is interesting to kind of unearth a little bit, you've talked about generally supporting companies in the labor pools that are maybe not quite absolutely mission critical to the make or break of the company. Like you said, if it's a fintech, maybe or an engineering based firm, you might be playing, not replacing that as the core. It might be supplementing in other areas. But the thing I think that didn't resonate with me, I used to think that offshoring generally meant lower skill set. And knowing now that there's these pools of talent that are being trained by American companies, and you can get PhD level talent. What's the kind of range of stuff? Do you guys do data scientists? Where does this cap out? Where does this cap out? How should people think about, is it customer service only, or is there more?
Oh, no. I don't know where it caps out, to be honest with you. I mean, we've gone as senior as controllers. We recently hired a VP of engineering to report into a US-based co-founder CTO. And what's interesting about that particular hire, Mark, the savings on that VP engineering role actually aren't the main motivator. It is the specific skill set that VP of engineering possesses as it relates to the business challenges faced by the client. And so what motivated that decision was not cost savings. Yeah, there's some, but it was really more about a need skill set alignment. And what we found is that is only truer in the more senior roles, right? And I think you could even see that, like a proxy for what I'm talking about is when we think about pay levels or pay bands. They're usually a lot narrower with junior level roles, right? Because we can define more narrowly the skill set that we need, the scope of the role, so on and so forth. As we get more senior, right, those pay bands tend to expand because it's like, well, we know we need it to go in this direction, but there's probably going to be a bit of flex, right? And depending on the exact skill set the person brings, right, like we might have them do more, it might be different, so on and so forth. So what we've found in the outsourcing capacity is the more senior the role, the less the argument is about the savings. Again, that's still there. Maybe as a percent, of what you'd spend in the U.S., the savings isn't as strong. But what the conversations we're actually having at that point are about the core business challenges, the requirements for the role, and we're finding really strong alignment there. So I have yet to see it cap out. And just being that we are a generalist firm, we do support startups across a range of industries. We support functional areas, across all businesses. I mean, we've hired radiologists who work as radiologists full-time in country, but then, moonlight for biotech startups at night, reading scans, helping them code information for AI, so on and so forth. So yeah, we've hired data scientists, engineers, a lot of finance. We're doing a ton of finance accounting, which I think is sort of on trend with what's happening in the U.S. right now. It's getting harder to find accountants, and so I have yet to really run into a scenario where we can't do it. Now, obviously, in some cases, it might be a situation where we have to say, hey, Normally, this would be a few week process. We're going to need a few months or a couple months or something like that. But that's a conversation we're having with the client, and we're understanding if that timeline makes sense for them. The other thing I'll say about this is, we don't necessarily know where, AI is phenomenal. I use it every day personally. I'm encouraging everybody on the team to use it. We are, pulling it into our workflows. I see huge opportunity for it in the talent acquisition function. Back to that idea of finding fit alignment. But I think there's two things that are likely to happen in terms of impact on outsourcing. Number one, obviously, it's going to make boring tasks faster, right? So the conversations I'm having with most clients are not, well, this used to be something we did with people, now we're doing it only with AI. The conversation is more like, we used to need 3 people, now we only need 2 or 1 maybe, right? But the other thing that I think might happen here is things that maybe a company never would have considered outsourcing before because maybe they were so challenging or sophisticated or potentially risky, right? I think there's going to be an opportunity to move more stuff offshore as a result of AI. So things that, from a value creation perspective, value change perspective, were maybe a little bit too upstream for moving offshore before. I think companies will start to reevaluate, thanks to AI tools, guardrails, redundancies, checks and balances that AI can provide. I think they're going to actually start to consider, moving additional things offshore. So, I think one of those is net positive for outsourcing. One of those is perhaps net negative for outsourcing. My general feeling is it's going to end up being, somewhere neutral. But yeah, again, back to your original question, I've yet to really have a conversation. I'm just trying to think back. I'm yet to really have a conversation where clients said, "Hey, we want to hire, we want to do something," and we're just totally out of options. So, and that's both in terms of breadth of functional area as well as the depth in terms of seniority.
So it probably wouldn't be hard for most of the startup executives out there to find an outsourcing CEO who will give them a good explanation of why they should outsource. But you're on the front lines, right? So you're seeing the successes and the failures where it doesn't work for people.
Mm-hmm.
To impart a little bit of additional truth and transparency, what are the scenarios where people shouldn't outsource?
It's a great question. We've actually been talking about this recently because, we were at an event recently and we were talking to some startup founders, and some of the feedback we got is, and it's a perception. I don't know if it's a misperception or not, but, the feedback was, we're not sure outsourced, talent is really ready. What did they say? Not ready, but, we're working for a startup. There's not always, well, usually not. There's usually not clearly defined role boundaries, right? There's usually a lot of flex. You're wearing a lot of hats. People need to take a ton of initiative. People need to step, right? So working for a startup, especially an early stage startup, comes with a unique set of challenges, right? And so the perception, the feedback that we heard at this event was, we're not sure that, outsourced talent can really hang, right? Can really keep up with that. And it really got me thinking because, truthfully, we have run into that, right? We have had team members who don't work out, and we even went back and reviewed, termination logs over the last year because we were like, let's dig into like the data we have and let's try to understand this problem. And we do find some scenarios where you could sort of label it as, maybe not a good fit for a startup environment. I think where I got to on this question is, how is it different than hiring in the US? Because even when I'm hiring for our HQ team in the US, I work pretty hard to assess fit for startup environment. And in general, I've learned that if you are coming out of a big company environment, you might struggle in a startup environment. I think it's just as true in the US as it would be in any country on earth. And as we were trying to figure out how to address this question, I mean, we have to probably get a little bit clever in how we're thinking about, getting, prospective clients and current clients to really like think about this in a reflective way. Because again, I do think the truth is, if there is some magic recipe, magic sauce that would, perfectly guarantee, fit for startup, like I would love to know what it is, right? Wouldn't we all? So I do think that the truth there, and what I've seen is when I think about clients we work with who, there's sort of a range of have it together and don't have it together in terms of being able to define what the role is, what the objectives are, what we're doing as a company. Maybe there's a plan for incentive pay, whether it's commission or bonuses, maybe there's not. But in general, the more that the companies have that figured out, I do tend to find that there's more success. So for me, ultimately, I think it comes down to whether you're hiring in the US or you're hiring offshore, it helps to have a plan in place, a people plan. And this is something we help with. I mean, this is something we help customers with when they're kind of going from 1 to 10, 10 to 100 in terms of scale. But what usually doesn't work well is when a client says, hey, we just need this problem solved, figure it out. And I'm being a little hyperbolic, but that's ultimately the feeling of it. And it's not a silver bullet, in other words. So to the extent clients can share with us their vision, share with us their goals, objectives, their fundraising strategy and scenario, what they're trying to achieve, the more that they can pull us along, and then therefore we can pull the team along, we tend to see greater success. It's when clients again are thinking about this as perhaps more of that traditional BPO where it's like, let's just flip this over the wall and let Spoke take care of it. That's or not even just Spoke, but any outsourcing partner. That's when I would tend to say, it's gonna be worth your time getting more organized and being a little bit more thoughtful before you try to work with an outsourcing partner.
Shaun, thanks for being on today. This was super valuable.
Yeah, my treat.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to that. Big thank you for Shaun for making time. We try to get some real insight on how to think about the outsourcing side of the world. Again, as I said in the intro, I think it's underutilized. And in particular because it's so complicated to figure out where it fits in an organization because it fits in so many places. I think when you need to hire a certain type of development task out, that's more obvious than broadly thinking about supplementing the entire workforce in the right way. So hopefully that was helpful, and we'll catch you next time.